Professor Peter Singer, so wonderful to be with you again. Where are you today in the world?
I'm in Melbourne, in Australia.
Melbourne,
This is
Australia. I'm
my
on the
home
other
city
side of the
where I
world.
was born and have a lot of family.
Wonderful. It's so wonderful to have you back again and have this conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time once again. Um, and I'm looking forward to discussing primarily this book, The Buddhist and the Ethicist, Conversations on Effective Altruism, Engaged Buddhism, and How to Build a Better World, that you've written with Venerable Shi Chao Wei. What led you to create this this book? And this seems a very kind of different direction, a different, maybe perhaps novel, as you mentioned earlier, kind of direction. What led you towards this interest?
It is something new for me. You're right about that, and it's quite a long story. It's been a project many years in the making. I first met Venerable Shi Chao Wei, um, well, something like maybe 30 years ago, 25 anyway, when I was invited to a conference in Taiwan, which is where she lives, on animal welfare issues. And I met her because she was the founder of the Life Conservation Association, which was an animal welfare organization in Taiwan. And so we met on that occasion, but we didn't have a lot of time to talk individually. She then invited me back, or I was invited back for another conference more recently, maybe 10 years ago. Uh, and on that occasion, we traveled from Taipei to Hualien, which is a city on the coast, quite far away, to visit a place that had been established by another Buddhist female monastic, and so we traveled in the train together. And during that journey, we had quite a lot of time to talk, and it was there that we got to explore the differences and parallels in our ideas. And it occurred to me then that this would be an interesting thing to write up, to actually to have recorded some of that conversation and to write it up and elaborate on it. And of course, we hadn't recorded it; we were just traveling on the train. But I mentioned that to her, and she arranged for me to come back to Taiwan a year or two later to spend some time at a beautiful mountaintop meditation retreat where we did speak over 2 fairly full days, and that was recorded, and then a transcript was written up from that. But when we looked at that in writing, even that wasn't really full enough. I suppose, although it sounds like 2 full days is a lot, we did have everything being translated, because although Chao Wei speaks English, she wasn't confident enough about her English to, discuss these deeper issues without some translation. So when we wrote it up and looked at it, it still seemed like there was a need for more, for going into more depth, more thoroughness, and expanding the conversation. So we decided to do that over email, and that took us about another 5 years, which is why it's taken a while for the book to actually emerge. But I'm very happy with the result after all of that further work and a bit of polishing and editing and so on. I'm delighted that it gives people a chance to look at a conversation between myself, a secular utilitarian in the Western philosophical tradition, and Venerable Chao Wei, a very knowledgeable and thoughtful Buddhist, and one who explores ethical issues that are in some ways that parallel to the ways that I do, and in other ways that differ. And that's what makes the conversation fascinating.
One of the things that really struck me was the kindness and friendly manner of your conversation. When I think about conversations between people like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, that kind of come from a very scientific, atheistic lens, and then discuss with people of faith traditions, it's very kind of at each other's throats often. Kind of, even where there's disagreement, it doesn't seem like, or where there's agreement, it doesn't seem like the tone is a friendly one, a loving one. And I felt immediately that there was a soft, gentle kindness to the discussion that was just so wonderful to read, and I felt like I was present amongst loving people, kind people, in that. Could you say something about that? You know, the method at which ideas are shared.
Well, I mean, I think my style is a little different from that of the people that you mentioned, but maybe there would be some people that I would be less kind towards if I really thought that they were misleading people and steering them down paths that were harmful for the world and for themselves. But certainly with Xiao Wei, I also responded to her kindness and her compassion, I think, and she's very much, what you might think of as a Buddhist who is motivated by loving kindness for all sentient beings, and that's really important to me. And so there would be absolutely no reason for me to engage in a hostile way. I certainly have some differences, but the differences are things that I want to explore and understand. The differences are not things that I want to say, you know, I'm right, you're wrong, and I don't want anybody to be listening to you, because that would be misleading. In this particular case, I wanted to understand how a different approach to my own, but one where I can recognize the motivation to reduce suffering among sentient beings, and I can obviously share that motivation. So I want to see how that works, what the thinking is behind it, to what extent it's a departure from scientific views. You mentioned that Dawkins and Sam Harris have a scientific background, but I like to think of myself as also favoring a scientific understanding of the world and how we are part of it. But I want to see how other people may understand this as well. And of course, particularly in a tradition like Buddhism, there may be real wisdom that has, ancient wisdom that has been preserved, or new learning that has been discovered over the centuries, that we can benefit from. It would be very arrogant to think that we Westerners understand everything better than anybody else. There's no reason to think that that's necessarily the case.
Yeah. Perhaps the one person that's changed my worldview more than others is Ram Dass, who was at Harvard teaching psychology. And he said, we're at the highest seat of academia here, teaching people about the mind. But what I noticed was much of the faculty is as neurotic as everybody else. And, he felt that when he started studying a lot of the ancient traditions, he said there was, maps of understanding the mind that have been, thousands of years old, exploration of mind, and, kind of these ideas like Buddhism and other traditions. And so he went on that journey, and that really kind of got me thinking about that there's more to just, modern understanding. There is value in ancient traditions, which can help us understand the mind and our place in the world in a deeper way. And when I was reflecting on, even just the cover of this book, which is very kind of, really is striking with, the Buddha's image, as well as, kind of this here. And there's a book which was called The Mingling of Oceans. And it was written by Dara Shikoh, one of the Mughal emperors. And Dara Shikoh was known for wanting to share ideas and to understand different philosophies. And his book was a translation of the Upanishads. Are you familiar with the Upanishads?
A little, yes, sure. I know what they are.
So, and I can't remember whether it was Persian or Arabic he translated them into, but this was the first time that they were translated and shared across borders. And one of the things I really find is that when I go into one of the favorite things to do is to go into bookshops. And when I'm in London or in New York traveling, I always walk around bookshops and I kind of think about how much, if you think about 50% of the world's population is probably Indian or Chinese, how many of the ideas of these ancient cultures are represented in modern bookshops around the world, even in India? Like if we went to a bookshop in Mumbai, how much is representative? And I think, I feel that the work that you've done here, this very conversation, this is actually a mingling of oceans, that you're opening up conversation and giving validation to ancient traditions to express themselves and be, looked into. I think it's very wonderful and very serious, very important. I think you're mingling oceans by going into this conversation.
That's a lovely metaphor.
Yeah. I want to say thank you for that.
No, right. You're welcome. Thank you. Yes, and of course, Ram Dass is not the only one who has thought that Buddhism in particular has a good understanding of human psychology and also of what it takes for us to live fulfilling and rewarding lives. One of the conversations that I had when this book was first published, I was then in Princeton, and one of the conversations was with Robert Wright, who's somebody who comes out of a Western tradition. He wrote a well-known book called Non-Zero, about having non-zero-sum interactions with people, and in fact has a foundation, nonzero.org. But he became interested in Buddhism, and he wrote a book called Why Buddhism is True. And I asked him about that and said, what is it you think that reincarnation, for example, is true? One aspect that I don't myself find evidence for, and actually which Shi Chao-wei did not try to persuade me was true. She thought that was something that you can believe or not believe, but it's not a core belief that you have to be a Buddhist. And he said no, but he was talking about the psychology of Buddhism, basically, its understanding of the human mind, and he thought that was the core of it, and he thinks that is true. And so in a way, my interest in this is something a little bit similar. That is, there are going to be some beliefs that I would see as distinctively religious, in the sense that they are not scientifically validated, that I will not accept. But there are many other things that are part of this rich tradition, which I can certainly would want to explore and learn from, and quite possibly would accept.
The sound just cut out on the last word that you said, that you quite possibly
would accept.
Would accept, yeah. I love that approach, and I think that Buddhism and the other Indian traditions lend to that kind of approach. If I think about the Bhagavad Gita, after teaching the whole Gita, the 700 verses, Krishna says to Arjuna at the end, now I've taught you this wisdom. Consider it, deliberate upon it, think about it very carefully, and do as you wish to do. He doesn't say that these are commandments that you have to take on board. He kind of shares the ideas throughout the text, and then kind of says, think about it, and then choose what you think is relevant for you, and take it forward. So I feel like there is a common grounding for such understanding, and even growing up as a Hindu, I was never forced ever to understand, like to follow anything. It was all kind of just presented as, here are various ideas, and never once has anybody asked me, do you or do you not accept reincarnation, or right. Even the encouragement to be vegetarian or to kind of practice these things is never in a very forceful way. Even the way Buddhism shares its ideas with the world is never very, you don't often see Buddhists standing on the corners of streets shouting at people, or kind of no. Taking aggressive. So I think the means is very much as important as the end, in terms of we don't want to create, if possible, more anger or more suffering in the world through the way that we get to a more compassionate environment.
Yes, you're right, and I think that is a difference between both Buddhism and Hinduism in their approach to ethics, and at least a lot of the mainstream Christian tradition, which is much more saying, these are commandments that you must uphold, and it's absolutely wrong to do certain things. So I'm a little bit torn between those two views. In general, I think yes, it's much better to try to persuade people to put reasons before them and to hope that they will move towards those reasons. At the same time, I'm sometimes a little disappointed when I visit a Buddhist country. Maybe it's Thailand, let's say, which says it's a Buddhist country, and yet there are so few vegetarians. There's not a sense that, oh yes, we're Buddhists, so we shouldn't be eating meat. We shouldn't be supporting this massive industry that intensively confines animals indoors, gives them miserable lives, slaughters them, and so on. And I would like to see, I guess I would like to see a Buddhist tradition making that point a little more strongly, being engaged in that world and trying to be more active in persuading people not to be complicit in the suffering of animals as well as various other forms of suffering. And I should add, one of the things I responded to positively in Shi Wei's thinking is that she is an engaged Buddhist. She is a Buddhist who wants to be engaged in the world and help things to change, be part of the change.
Well, I've actually written that word down here in one of my notes: engaged Buddhism. And I think the organization that we run, Go Dharmic, is a form of engaged Sanatana Dharma, like the eternal Dharma. Like, we don't necessarily describe it as simply Buddhist or Hindu or any other tradition. It's an engaged way of viewing the world, engaged philosophy of Dharma, like seeing that this is our Dharmic responsibility to improve the state of the world for all sentient beings. And that can be, it's not necessarily so belief based as it is the actions that we do. I think I would consider you a Dharmavadin, a practitioner of Dharma, in the sense that you want to work to make this world a better place. If adharma is making it a worse place, in that way, I actually, this was the last topic that I wanted to kind of discuss with you, but I think we can come back to the other ones after, because you've touched on engaged way. I actually see and hope for a type of understanding that we can promote that's engaged humanity in this kind of way, that we have this universal philosophy of compassion, which should become a universal understanding, and not just for Buddhists or Hindus or for.
Okay.
Just discussing this idea of engaged Buddhism leading to an understanding of engaged humanism, or an overall path for all of us, a dharma that we can all follow and share a story of compassion. How can we get there? Like, for me, this is the ideal, where we all as a human family have something that we aspire to make the world a more loving and compassionate place, a universal dharma, as it were.
Yes, I wish I knew how we could get there. I don't. We did discuss that in the dialogue. Chow Wei thinks that meditation is one way of getting to a more universal compassion. She recommends that people meditate, and that they start by meditating on someone they love, someone close to them, and they think they feel compassion and love for them, and they think about how important it is that that person not be hurt, that they not be harmed, and have a good life. And then you gradually extend that out to someone whom you're less close to, but maybe still feel positive about, and then you try to extend those feelings to everybody, to all sentient beings. So I think that's an interesting process, and indeed it may work. As a philosopher, I've been more concerned to produce reasoning, if you like, to get people to see that I am just one being in the world with my own interests and my own capacity to enjoy life or to suffer, and that I'm one of a very large number of other beings, some of whom are human beings like me, and some are not, but still also capable of having a good life with positive experiences, or a life of pain and suffering and frustration. And if we can see that, then I think we can see that um, there's a perspective, a more universal perspective, from which every being's interests count, and um, none of them count more than anyone else's, unless they're greater or stronger interests. Like, so yes, if a being has greater capacity for intense pain and suffering, that being's suffering might count more than one who has a more dull capacity. But essentially, pain is pain, pleasure is pleasure, and we should not be saying, because that being is not like me, and that might mean not a member of my country, of my ethnic group, of my religion, or it might even mean not a person of my, not a being of my species. But those are not reasons for saying that pain doesn't matter, or that uh, having a rich and enjoyable life isn't important.
Have you explored meditation yourself? Did you try and practice at all when you were there in Taiwan, or
I,
personally? Is it an area that you've explored?
I have on a couple of occasions. Initially, a very long time ago, when I was a graduate student in Oxford, and there was a vogue for transcendental meditation, which, the Beatles went to India and meditated with
Maharishi.
Mahesh Yogi. Yes, that's right. And so I tried it at that time, partly because people were saying, well, if you meditate, it helps you concentrate, you feel more peaceful, more relaxed. Yes, it takes a little bit of time. I was meditating for 20 minutes twice a day. But on the other hand, you're more alert. You maybe don't need as much sleep. So even in in the sense of efficiently using your time for work, because I was studying, of course, and trying to do well, um, it's not really losing time. So I did that for quite a while, and for some time, it seemed to work well for me, and I kept it up. And after a while, the effect started to fade, and I guess I got busy with other things and dropped it. Um, and then when I was in Taiwan on the occasion when we had the dialogue, as I said, we were at a meditation center, and the director of the meditation center came with me and with Chow Wei to teach me a different kind of meditation. The transcendental meditation used a mantra that I repeated in my mind. Whereas what I did in Taiwan was what Chow Wei called body scanning. So I would be closing my eyes, sitting, and thinking about being conscious of how I was feeling, starting with the top of my head, and going right through my whole body and my arms and feet, to being aware of them and aware of the state they were in. And then when I had got to my feet, I would start again, and go through that again. And that also seemed to work in an interesting way. And I still do. I actually alternate a bit between the mantra style meditation and the body scanning style meditation. I still do them occasionally, particularly if for some reason I'm not getting enough sleep. Might be that I'm just waking up too early. It might be that I've been traveling and I'm jet lagged, and I find um, meditation a good way to relax myself and rest myself, and in that way make up for the fact that I haven't really slept as much as I usually do. So I'm not a regular practitioner, but it's certainly still a part of my life that I like to do from time to time.
See, I really feel that it's got great value as well. Like Venerable Chi Chao Wei said to you that if we become calmer, then we're less likely to make decisions based on overwhelming passion or greed or baser qualities that could kind of take over our reasonable thinking faculties and make kind of more ethical dharmic choices, as it were. I just read something that I highlighted in the book that she mentioned. When we discuss the respective roles of passion and reason, we cannot start by talking about the enlightened ones or holy people called bodhisattvas. We should talk about ordinary people. Otherwise, we talk about things that would be only applicable to bodhisattvas. If we observe bodhisattvas, we will discover a principle. The more selfless their emotions are, the stronger their compassion or empathy for others is. When their emotions are guided by reason to act altruistically, their service to others is more powerful. In a different way, reason completes the strong, purified, selfless passion of bodhisattvas to benefit others. So I think the contribution, or what I'm getting at, is that I really feel that there's something to be said for having practices that can help us control one's emotions, one's life, to be calmer, more peaceful in a social work, as it were, to be able to serve in the world in a more non-violent and peaceful and calmer way. What's your thoughts around that? I know you mentioned around that it helps you be calmer and more rested and more peaceful, perhaps more concentrated, focused. But from a social perspective, from an engaged perspective, meditation as a tool for social action.
Yes,
where do you
yes,
see
I
that?
think it is. Yeah, and let me just say, I really like the passage you read because I think it does show the way in which Chow Wei's concern for compassion and loving kindness, and my somewhat greater emphasis on reason. But I'm not saying that Chow Wei doesn't emphasize reason. She does, but she brings it into that broader context, and I think that shows some of the overlapping elements of the two traditions. But to get to your question, I totally agree that I think if you are calm and if meditation helps you to become calmer, your social relationships are likely to be much more positive. You're less likely to feel some of the negative emotions, the sort of competitive emotions, a sense that, somebody else is doing better than me. I'm jealous or upset by that, or I'd like to do better. Those are harmful and negative emotions, which unfortunately many people feel quite a lot of the time. And I think they're big barriers to producing a more peaceful and compassionate world. So if we can help people to develop mindfulness is a sort of current term for what we're talking about, to develop mindfulness and to be aware of their own feelings and aware of their own emotions and saying, okay, I'm feeling this now, but do I really want to act in accordance with this feeling? Is that going to be the best thing for me and others in the situation that I'm in? I think if people can respond to that, we will have much better social relationships. We'll have much more positive and cooperative work with others, and we'll achieve a better world. But again, how you get everybody to do that is not easy to know.
Yeah. There's a Ram Dass quote where he says, the greatest thing I can do for the world is to work on myself. And he was talking about this very thing, that if I can become as compassionate as possible myself, that anybody who engages with me will feel that, they'll be moved by that. I very much feel it with you as well. When we have these conversations, I can feel a sense of overwhelming kindness, compassion that's there to work for the benefit of the world. I know it's coming up to probably 9 p.m. where you are in Melbourne. It's dinner time. You could be
No,
enjoying.
I've had my dinner.
You've had it. Watching a movie.
We don't eat that late here. I had it before
Okay.
we started talking. Yeah.
But you could be doing other things than talking about, increasing compassion through calming the mind. And, you've had a long, hard-working career, but you're choosing to still, be engaged and work for the welfare of the world.
Well, this is a fulfilling thing to do, right? I mean, I could stop doing all that, and then what would I be doing? Well, I would have more time to read books, perhaps, and I would want to travel more. But I think that having a purpose and not a purpose that you create for yourself, like I want to lower my handicap at golf, but a purpose that you actually recognize is something that is important and that can make a difference and make the world a better place. I think that actually makes one's life much more fulfilling than simply playing a game as a pastime. But I do want to say, before we move on, I want to say one thing about the quote you gave from Ram Dass, where you said, the best thing that I can do is to work on myself. Now, sometimes that might be the best thing that you can do, because yourself is in a bad state, where otherwise whatever you try to do will have a negative effect on the world. But one of the things that I talked about with Chao Wei, and it comes from this idea of engaged Buddhism that we talked about before, is that I have encountered Buddhists who spent an enormous amount of time meditating. As a passage in the book, I refer to whatever they say they spent, was it's 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 hours in meditation. And if you break that up into months and years, it's a large part of anyone's life. And I do wonder whether that is the best thing one could do, given that that time could also be used for something else, like encouraging other people to live better lives, or encouraging people to help those in extreme poverty, or to reduce, not contribute to the suffering of animals, or work against climate change, or work for equality of women and of oppressed groups, all of those things. And she actually, she pointed out that there are these two paths in Buddhism. There is the path in which you try and work towards your own enlightenment, and ultimately achieve nirvana and sort of leave the world. And there's the path in which you delay achieving nirvana for yourself, because there is so much to do in the world. And that's closer to
Bodhisattva.
the path of engaged Buddhism. That's the Bodhisattva view. That's right. Which she very kindly said is what I'm pursuing. So
Right.
she
So
told me that I am a Bodhisattva, which I can't accept such an honorable title, but if I'm somewhere in that tradition, then that's very good.
Well, I agree. I love that she said that, and I do believe that as well. Your path is the path of the Bodhisattva, and the engaged path of, your in Sanskrit. There's a term called sadhana, which we describe as the practice that you do. And some people's practice might be meditation, so that their sadhana is to go and meditate for hours a day and spend that time. And then there's others whose practice is service, and their service to the world, service to other sentient beings, service to humanity. I agree that there's different paths. I mean, I've got this book from the 12th century on my desk. It's called the Sarva Darshan Sangraha, and it's written by a saint called Madhvacharya, and it includes all of the various schools of Indian philosophy around at the time, and describes the various angles and ideas that they had at the time, and includes Buddhism and Jainism and Sankhya philosophy and yoga philosophy. But what's interesting is it doesn't describe them in a way that's exclusivist. It's very much like, there's my cousins over there, or this is my family over there, and they're from different parts of the world, but they enjoy a kind of mingling of these ideas in a much more
Right.
open way. And I think that Buddhism has done a great, like this, the idea of bodhisattva is there amongst many of these traditions. that you are doing this for the welfare of the world. So I think if somebody was meditating and they were only meditating on compassion for 4 hours a day, and they're up in the hills, somebody who comes into contact with that person, even if it's for a much shorter time period, will be I'm open to the fact that you could be significantly moved by that person in a different degree to a person who's not spending that time in spiritual awareness or loving awareness or loving kindness. Are you open to that?
Yes. Look, that's possible. But I'm looking at probabilities, I guess, and where you're more likely to make the biggest difference. And if you are in some remote part of the Himalayas, then how many travelers are going to come to your door? Well, maybe if you become very well known, they'll start to beat a path to your door. But I suppose many of them don't, and maybe they could have done something that would have achieved more good. So I
think the
accept
Buddha
that
kind of has that middle path. If we kind of look at the middle path as a kind of a reasonable way and approach, I kind of would always look at that. Let's not go too far to the forest. Let's not also, lose the fact that practice is important, perhaps. I want to ask you about something that's very close to me, and the idea of ahimsa. I know that it does come up in the sense of animal welfare here, but I think perhaps more time I would have loved to see in the conversation about the idea of ahimsa as a really important philosophical concept for as an idea of non-violence that's runs through perhaps Buddhism, but perhaps from the animal welfare perspective that you've spent your whole life speaking about. What is your understanding of ahimsa, perhaps from this book and these conversations, but also your wider understanding now of its importance?
Yeah, I think the concept is there in the book, though maybe not given that particular term. But certainly there's quite a lot of discussion in the book about circumstances in which killing may be a kind thing to do. And that's a real dilemma for Chow Wei. She feels it somewhat more strongly than I do, but I certainly can be sensitive to it as well. She talks, for example, about at the Buddhist school at which she was teaching, there were stray dogs who used to come onto the campus, and the people would feed them and would look after them, and essentially they would become like campus dogs who were cared for there. And she talks about one case of one dog who I think was badly injured in an accident with a car and became ill, and so there was a discussion eventually about this dog is suffering, this dog is not going to recover, what are we going to do? And I think in Western societies, people would have fairly quickly come to the view, well, let's take the dog to the vet, and the vet will give the dog an injection so the dog will go to sleep and not wake up. But that was certainly more difficult for Chow Wei and for the Buddhists she was with. It's not that they absolutely refuse to do that, in this sense, as you said before, they don't have absolute commands. There were circumstances when they would do that, but it was still an act of killing that they would try to avoid if they possibly could. So I think that's, there was some exploration of these concepts of nonviolence and the importance of maintaining nonviolence, and what did it mean when the only alternative to something that might be seen as violence, an act of killing, was more prolonged suffering, or in other examples, perhaps more widespread killing, not done by them, but by others. So we talked about pacifism in war, for example, as well, which is another difficult area where it's not always easy to apply concepts like ahimsa.
Yeah. It is a very difficult concept, and I think there's no absolute ahimsa, because even there's always going to be some level of violence with every step that we take, or kind of breathing in some way. We can't have absolute non-violence ever. but I quite agree with that. I find it also difficult, that even if there was an absolute requirement to, help the dog, in that instance, it would be, a most terrible thing and kind of a very painful thing to do. It should be treated with very, difficulty, and the last thing we want to do. I think one of the things that I've kind of taken from the Mahabharata is that if you just empower the ability to do violence, then often that can get taken over by people who, want to use it for their own gain, or use it for their own, kind of personal ambition, or personal growth, or, or cultural or group ambition. Whereas if we promoted an idea that non-violence is universal, and that we should try and work towards reducing suffering wherever and whenever it exists, then we all try to reduce that. That seems sensible to me. When we get into the thing, okay, this is like, I was in, to give you an example, I was in Parliament last year, and they were talking about too many foxes and squirrels in Wimbledon Common. Right. And the MP in the room was speaking, and I won't mention his name, but he laughingly and jokingly said that, we should just get a drone and wipe them out, or guns and shoot them all, so that we'll resolve the problem of foxes and squirrels in Wimbledon Common. And that took me aback and made me feel the approach to violence is so loose and so comfortable, and we're so easy with it that it becomes very.
It was the first thing that he thought of, not the last thing, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly that. Exactly that.
Yeah.
And I think what this book kind of shows through that conversation, and you lovingly kind of show two sides of that equation, of kind of showing the ethical dilemma as well as that emotional heart of not wanting to cause harm. I think the two together can, when there's heart and mind together, then I believe we'll come to better responses. Where, as you say, violence should be the last thing, not the first thing.
Right. Yes, that's right. And yeah, it's unfortunate that we can't say that it's never justifiable, but unfortunately, given the way the world is, and given that if you did absolutely forswear it, there would be people who would take advantage of that, and we can see that in the world today. I think we can't say that, but I entirely agree. We should look for all other methods of solving the problem before we decide that we have to resort to violence.
A question, just while we're talking about violence and animal welfare as well, and kind of touching on this. During the conversation, she mentioned to you that the organization, Master Cheng Yen, encouraged followers to adopt a vegetarian diet, which has influenced the majority of the members of the organization. Nearly 10 million people have become vegetarians on that example. These are the examples of an expansion of positive personal deeds. And you write, I'm very happy to hear about that. And of course, I very much appreciate the delicious vegetarian meals that everyone was eating at the meditation retreat. Perhaps in Taiwan, Buddhists have made more progress than in other countries. Thailand, for instance, is a Buddhist country, but there seems very few vegetarians there. What do you think are the lessons for places like Thailand, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and also I would include India, because as a land that kind of cultivated these ideas of Buddhism, is the meat consumption is increasing drastically there as well. And kind of I was at the World Economic Forum recently, and there was in documents celebrating ideas that kind of beef exports are going through some of the highest in the world of buffalo meat, or kind of this kind of thing. So I really feel there's a lesson from Taiwan that could be used for other countries and other places and other people that are developing their economies and their livelihoods and increasing their standard of living, to learn from this? What's your views?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. I think that there are lessons to be learned, and yes, the organization that Master Cheng Yen founded, of Tzu Chi, it's called, that has led so many people to become vegetarian, and also not only to become vegetarian, but to do good works for others around the world, is very impressive. And actually, I mentioned right at the beginning that the train journey that Chow Wei and I had taken, and that was to Hualien, where we visited Master Cheng Yen, and we looked at the amazing hospital and medical school that has been built by Tzu Chi, because that organization actually began when Cheng Yen was really a novice, I think a novice Buddhist monk, and she became aware that some of the local tribespeople from the hills had brought a woman who was pregnant and in the throes of giving birth to a doctor in the city because the birth had been obstructed. And the doctor said, if you want me to treat the woman you've brought to me, you have to pay me first. And they could not afford to pay. So they just had to carry her away again. And I don't actually know what happened. Perhaps she died. But Cheng Yen was so upset by that she started collecting money to provide some free healthcare for people who couldn't afford it. And that tiny effort grew into enough funds to build not only a modern hospital, but actually a medical school, which was teaching medical graduates to people to become doctors and to work in a Buddhist tradition as well. So that was a wonderful experience. And can you replicate it elsewhere? Can you replicate it in those countries where Buddhism is officially the dominant belief, but there's very little signs of it in terms of what people eat and what people practice towards others? Again, I really don't know. I mean, I hope so. I hope that there will be reformers. Actually, the book that we're discussing has just been translated into Thai and is being published in Thailand very shortly. So I hope it will be read, and I hope that I know that there are Thai Buddhists who are very much engaged Buddhists. So I hope that idea will spread in Thailand, and perhaps the book can contribute in a small way to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly sharing it with all of our community, and anybody that's following the work of Go Dharmic. I've encouraged to read it and to explore those ideas. And
Thank you.
and I think, as I've kind of mentioned before, that I think it's not really only relevant for Buddhists. I think it's relevant for everybody. I think it's relevant for people who follow scientific tradition, people who follow Buddhist tradition, but also all those in between that can see, like what we call the mingling of oceans, because I think it does more than just talk about ethical discourse. I think it talks about the need for more cross-pollination of ideas that can help us make like a kinder, better world. I think that is important. And I was listening to Brian Cox the other day, and he was talking about how he wishes he could send all politicians to space so that they could see the Earth, and kind of when they see the Earth, they have a more global view, rather than this kind of often we have a very limited view of this is
Yeah,
my
very
culture, or
narrow.
this is my tradition.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's this idea that I was mentioning before, that we have the capacity to see ourselves as one being among others, and not just as, one being among others, say in my case, my fellow Australians or something like that, but really one being among others in the world as a whole. Um, and I think that's what we need to do. The 19th century utilitarian philosopher Henry Sidgwick had this used this phrase about the point of view of the universe, and he didn't mean that the universe actually has a point of view. He wasn't suggesting that the universe is a kind of a consciousness, but he was suggesting that we have the capacity to abstract from our own self-interested perspective and take that universal point of view. And when we do, then we can see that the well-being of everybody matters just as much as the well-being of anyone else. So I think that's the same idea that was being expressed by Brian Cox about sending the politicians into space. Although at first, when you mentioned that, I thought he wanted to get rid of them so that they wouldn't be messing up the planet that we have here. And there may be some politicians that I wouldn't mind sending into space, but
Right.
we do need to make decisions here on Earth by somehow.
Yeah, and I think you asked the question in the book as well, don't you, to Venerable Shi Chao, where you ask how can one expand that sense of self, and then kind of she elucidates on some of the practices of meditation and kind of what. But your understanding now, what do you think we can do to expand that sense of self to be more, we're so self-centered, aren't we? Like we really just kind of focus on a very narrow individual lens of us and those closest to us, and then kind of neglect those globally. What's the few things that you think we should be working on as people to expand that?
I think there are two different paths that we can take in terms of talking to people about this. One is simply to basically what we've been saying, that for people who have already some acceptance of the idea that they want to live ethically, and that's important to them, for them we can try to say, look, living ethically can't be just about looking after your family and your friends and your relatives or people who are close to you. It has to be broader than that. It has to take this point of view of the universe and be more impartial. And so, if you want to live an ethical life, then think about what you can positively do to help others, to help everyone. But for some people, then that isn't really going to work, because they're going to say, well, okay, but that's pretty demanding then, right? I have to stop doing some things that I enjoy doing because I have to, it would be better to take the opportunity to make a positive difference in the lives of others. And why should I live that life, that more demanding life? And there I think that we can appeal to recent psychological research, which shows that actually people are more satisfied with their lives. They are more content. They have a higher level of well-being themselves if they have this larger purpose and they're generous and kind to others. One example of this, I wrote a book in 2009 called The Life You Can Save, which was about helping people in extreme poverty. And incidentally, if I then updated it, a 2019 edition, and an organization grew out of that book called The Life You Can Save, and it has a website, thelifeyoucansave.org. And incidentally, if people want to read the book, you can download it free as an ebook or an audio book from thelifeyoucansave.org. But that organization, the fact that the shift from just being a book to being an organization, was really the work of Charles Bressler, who's somebody who had had a career in business, a successful career. He was president of a nationwide American men's clothing chain. But he had felt that somehow he had got into a career that didn't match the values that he held. He had sort of drifted into it. There'd been a series of choices. He was tempted in each way to be more successful in a business sense, but he wasn't really satisfied with the way he'd lived. And this was by the time he'd reached something like 60, I think. So then he came across my book, The Life You Can Save, and he contacted me and said, I think there should be an organization that is promoting these ideas. and would you like me to help you set that up? So he initially went part-time, and then he really just resigned from the company that he was working with. And he says, somewhat jokingly maybe, because the organization is called The Life You Can Save, he said, the first life that I saved was my own, because my life wasn't going in the direction that I had wanted. And so he describes himself, he describes himself as an effective hedonist, somebody who is actually finding the best form of pleasure for himself. And
I
of
think the
course,
Dalai Lama
finding that
defines it
by
as
doing it for others.
yeah. I think the Dalai Lama defines this as good selfishness.
Right.
And
Yes, that's a nice way of putting it.
and I think now a lot of the scientific studies are showing that there is a helper's high, that kind of people who are engaged in volunteering, or have a greater sense of purpose and meaning through social service and helping others, perhaps unknowingly following the bodhisattva path, are actually feeling a lot more fulfilled with their lives, and feeling
Yeah.
happier for longer, and kind of so I think, yeah, you're making other people. So Neem Karoli Baba, great saint that was associated with Ram Dass, and somebody I consider my guru. When people asked him, how do you raise your Kundalini, as in how can you raise your yogic powers, or power of meditation to become enlightened or achieve this state of samadhi, or nirvana, whatever you wish to call it, he would say, go and serve the poor, go and feed people, go and help others.
Right.
Like, not have that self desire for nirvana for yourself, but to go and help others. And many people were inspired to go on and do incredible things from his teachings. One in particular I'll mention, his name is Larry Brilliant. Have you ever come across Larry Brilliant before?
I know the name. I'm not sure. Yeah, tell me more, because I think
So,
I will remember it when you tell me more.
as his name suggests, he lived a brilliant life. He still does wonderful work today. He's an epidemiologist in the US, but spent a lot of time in India eradicating smallpox through the largest vaccine campaign in history, I think, in India, and saw one of the last cases of smallpox, which obviously killed millions of people, and ran that campaign based on this outlook of, like you say, a bodhisattva type of service. And I think it can be tremendously powerful when inspired. And that's, our life's work with Go Dharmic, is to try and create more engagement around service, but not just that, this is from a place of guilt. This is a place of joy. This is a place of happiness. This is a place of love and compassion. That actually creates fulfillment. One of the words I use for purpose, as we mentioned purpose so many times in today's conversation, is dharma. That's your dharma. Is your purpose to be that way, because it's closest to our the best form of ourself, is to be
Right.
that way. So I believe this book is a great contribution. I do want to show it on the screen again for people who haven't seen it. It's a beautiful book. The conversation is beautiful. I've made a real mess of my copy with notes all over it, because I think it's kind of such an important work for many reasons. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if I may, to kind of give a final message to people who will pick this book up and not have kind of any understanding of either Buddhism or utilitarianism, for what they can actually take away from your experiences of having these conversations and sharing this message, and for why they should read it. I think we've given them a lot of reason, and hope that a lot of people do pick up the book and take it as a real a journey of exploration. But just some final thoughts, if I may request you to give to our listeners.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I want to go back to something that you said. You talked about this idea of the mingling of the oceans, And I think it's not just like Buddhism and secular Western philosophical approach. I think that what we are talking about are truths that you can find in many traditions around the world, both the large traditions that are famous and many of the smaller ones as well. That there are these ideas that humans continually come up with about how to live, about ethics. Some of these traditions have written documents that go back thousands of years. Some of them may not. But I think if you come to the book and read it, you will be not just thinking about, oh, I'm learning about Buddhism and I'm learning about a secular utilitarian ethic, but rather I'm learning about common truths that can be embraced by a wide variety of traditions, and that also, as we've been saying, have the support of modern research in psychology that have that kind of more statistical evidence about the greater probability of leading a good life if you are aware of these universal truths and you act in accordance with compassion and loving kindness for everyone.
Thank you, Professor Singer, and I just want to thank you for being a bodhisattva, for being on that, sharing light in the world, sharing dharma in the world, and helping us all on a journey of compassion and kindness, and recognizing that within the Buddhist tradition, within scientific tradition, and it gives me great validation on the work that we're doing with Go Dharmic. Really it does. And thank you for inspiring us all, and long may you continue to kind of share that voice of compassion with the world, and I hope we all listen to you.
Thank you, and thanks again for the opportunity to talk to your viewers and let them know about the existence of the book, and I hope that many of them will pick it up.